My name is Alba Azcona. I am an enthusiastic Salesforce developer who has been playing around with Salesforce for 2 years. And I currently work at financialforce.com. I'm a technical lead of a research and development team. And this is my email and my Twitter handle. Just in case you want to contact me, I will be very happy to help you. First of all, I want to give you a quick introduction about my company. My company is called Financialforce. We have a cloud ERP over the Salesforce platform. We develop businesses applications. Financialforce is part of the Unit 4 group. And we are based, our main headquarters are based in San Francisco. But we have development offices all around the world. For example, we have in Spain or here in England. As you can see from my accent, I come from the Spanish office. This is the outline of my presentation. As I have developed an application, we are going to see why I have done this application and what it's for. After that, we will have a quick demo to see how the application works. And we will deep into the details of the architecture and the code of the application. And in the end, we will have some time for questions and answers. The title of my presentation is Building a Web Application with Google Places and LightningConnect. And you may think, how I arrived to that? Well, one day, I thought, how can I learn LightningConnect and have fun at the same time? I knew LightningConnect was a Salesforce platform, a Salesforce feature, which allowed reading and writing real-time data from external data source. And I knew as well that Salesforce was a powerful platform which could make more simple the process of building our application. So one day, an important and funny idea came to me. Because what's more important than knowing where is a nearby to go there and take a beer, something to eat? So I decided to do this application, Food Affinity. Food Affinity is a restaurant recommendator. In Food Affinity, we read nearby eating places from GooglePlacesAPI. And as I didn't like the voting system of Google Places, because you can only give vote ratings from 1 to 5, and you cannot have decimals and so on, I wanted to implement my own voting system in Apex. And in addition, I have implemented an affinity algorithm which is able of recommending to you restaurants based on your votes and other users' votes. And everything is connected thanks to LightningConnect. So let's see a quick demo of my application. For that, I have done a video because I wasn't so confident about the internet here. So let's see the demo in a video. Okay, so I have my application done in Salesforce. When you go into the application, you are able to log in as a normal user, or you can sign up. This is because I have implemented a self-registering functionality. Here, I'm self-registering a new user. As you can see, I have registered 14, so I have tried many times. And then, once I have registered my user, I'm redirected to the main page of the application. This page is going to read your coordinates through JavaScript and send them to the server. So the server, which is Salesforce, is going to communicate with Google Places API and bring the nearby restaurants that are close to you. Also, these restaurants have a rating there. This rating, as I said you before, is stored in Salesforce. So, as normal restaurant recommendators do, we have the option of ordering them by popularity. This is by rating. The highest rating ones will be the first that will appear in the list. But as I wanted to implement something more, I thought about trying to solve a problem I usually have when I go to a restaurant recommendation. Because normally, when I go to a restaurant that has been recommended to me, I don't like too much the restaurant. And that happens because that recommendation is based in all the users that had bought this restaurant in the system. So maybe I don't have the same taste that my friend who likes very much luxury restaurants, and I prefer fast food. So I decided to do an affinity algorithm which is going to be able to evaluate your votes and know which are your preferences and recommend restaurants to you based on your votes and other user votes. So here in the application, we have another option, which is order by affinity. In which I can click and it will recommend restaurant to me based on my votes. What happened here? I haven't voted anything, so it's not able to recommend me anything. So if I go to, for example, the order by distance tab, I can give some votes to some restaurants. For example, this one I don't like too much, this one. These are restaurants from Granada. If you want to come, you can. You can log into the application, and they will be recommended to you. And then if I go to my Order by Affinity tab, now the system is able to know which restaurants to recommend to me, which hasn't to be ordered by popularity necessarily, because it will depend on my tastes. Then to finish, I can go into the details of a specific restaurant and see, for example, the map to see where it is placed, the opening hours, etc. Now, once we have seen our demo, let's explain how all of this has been implemented. Let's back again to the presentation. So, what's the flow of my application? What is the architecture of my application? As you have seen, it's all based in a Visualforce page. This Visualforce page is able to read your coordinates and send them to JavaScript to a controller, Visualforce controller, that I have defined in Apex. We are going to call this AES call getByDistance in order we see what we are talking about. Then my controller is going to perform a SQL query. Over what? Over a restaurant external object that I have defined and which is going to represent a restaurant from GooglePlacesAPI. For defining the communication between GooglePlacesAPI and Apex, I have defined a LightningConnect custom adapter, which is going to be responsible of knowing which SQL query is arriving, translating it into an HTTP request, and send the request to GooglePlacesAPI. So the API is going to send the response in JSON, and my adapter again is going to be able of parsing this JSON response into a list of restaurant objects. As you have seen, I can see as well the details of a specific restaurant. So I have defined another Ajax call, which is getDetail, which behavior is going to be almost the same, with the difference that the SQL query that I'm going to perform, instead of filtering by latitude and longitude, is going to filter by an external ID, which represents the restaurant in my external system. Then I had other option in the application that was voting a restaurant. For that, I have defined a custom object, which is called vote, and which has a external lookup relationship with my external object, restaurants, as a user can vote many restaurants. To finish, we had the two options of sorting, because the default one is ordered by distance. And these two options are not going to do any more requests to the Google Places API, because they are going to sort the restaurants which are loaded in my view state and which I first retrieved when I was first loaded into the page. We will see how this works later. Oh, sorry. Now I want to deep into the details of each part of my application. So let's see how I have defined my custom adapter. Or better, let's see why I have defined a custom adapter. As probably some of you will know, Salesforce provides some OData adapters for working with LightningConnect. But as Google Places was a REST read-only API, I had to develop a custom one. So for developing a custom adapter, you have to extend two classes. It's simple. The first one is called Data Source Provider. In Data Source Provider, you define the capabilities that your external data source is going to have. Query capabilities, search capability, authentication capabilities. And you have to extend a second class, which is called Data Source Connection. This second class is going to define how these capabilities are implemented. So this is an example of how I have created an external data source using my custom adapter, Google Places Provider, in my OR. The first thing we have to do when extending the data source connection is overriding the synchronization method. The logic executed in the synchronization method is the logic which is going to be executed when you click on Validate and Sync button when creating your adapter, your external data source, sorry. So in this synchronization method, we are going to define which tables do we want to have representing our data in our external data source. For example, in my case, I only needed one table, restaurant. And this table is going to have all these columns here. So when I define my external data source, or you define your external data source, because I'm providing the code to you, and you click on Validate and Sync button, automatically a table representing my restaurant is going to be created. This is a screen capture of how my restaurant table has been created. Then, we said before that when we go into the Visualforce page, the first call that is executed is get by distance, and that our controller is going to perform a SQL query parsing by latitude and longitude. Or we have as well another query that was get detail that is going to be translated into a SQL query filtering by external ID. So let's see how our custom adapter translates these SQL queries into HTTP requests. We have the get by distance calls, which is filtering by latitude and longitude. And we have the get detail call, which is filtering by external ID. So how do we do that our custom adapter notices which query is arriving? Well, for that, we have to override the query method in our connection class that we saw before. In that query method, a query context object is going to arrive. This query context object is going to have information about the query which is arriving. This is the table we are selecting, the columns we are trying to retrieve, the possible filters or order by clauses that can come with the SQL query, etc. So let's see first the second one because it's the easiest one. How do I determine that this query is arriving to me? Well, if I receive a filter which column name is external ID, I know I'm being asked for a specific restaurant. So in that case, I will perform the HTTP requests that brings my restaurant filtered by external ID. For a better separation of concerns, I have dedicated that to a external class, Google Places Service, that we will see later. In the first class, how do I know this query is arriving to me? Well, if I received a query which filter is a compound filter of type n, and which subfilters contains the column names latitude and longitude, I determine that, that this query is arriving to me. So I will call my Google Places service in order it's able to perform this HTTP request. So how do I perform this HTTP request, and how do I parse my JSON response? I have my Google Places service in which I have defined some methods which will be in charge of building the endpoint URL, executing the HTTP request thanks to HTTP Salesforce libraries, and deserialize the response. The response comes in JSON. It has a look something like that code we're seeing here in the right side of the screen. And in the end, this method is going to return a list of restaurants, which is my external object. What's the advantages of this? That since this moment, I can work with my external object as if it was a normal custom object I could have defined in my OR. For example, I can show it in a Salesforce component, and I can use the dot notation to access the attributes of my external object as if it was a custom one. Then what left me to explain is the apex logic that doesn't communicate with the server, the apex logic that performs the votations and the ordering. For that, I have defined a custom object, which is called vote. This custom object is going to have an external lookup to my restaurant external object and a normal lookup to my user object, as a user can vote many restaurants. The order by popularity call is very easy to implement because when I first load the restaurants into my view stage, I calculate the overall rating that they have in my system. So when I click on order by popularity, simply a sorting algorithm is executed and they are re-rendered again in my Salesforce page. The order by affinity call is a bit more complex. For implementing that, what I do is, if I'm a user who is ordering by affinity, the system tries to look for users who have voted the same restaurants as me. So these users enter in a kind of competition. For that, for each of those users, if the user has given the same rating as me to a restaurant, he will earn 3 points. And if the user has given 1 point up or 1 point down, he will earn 1 point. So in the end, I take the winner user and I order these close restaurants according to the preferences of that user. And to finish, how I have exposed all of this? Thanks to communities. I have created a community. I have enabled the self-registration feature in communities. And each time a user self-registers, he is assigned an authenticated website license. So for today, we have 10 licenses. The quickest one will be able to play with the application. So run. You can enter in this web page and register in the application and play a bit with it if you are curious. Nobody? To finish, this is my GitHub repository in which I have uploaded the whole code. I have created as well a README with instructions of how to expose the community, how to create the community, how to expose the community. And you only have to enter your Google Developer API key, and you can deploy the application with the ant migration tool, for example, or whatever. Yeah, everybody. So that's all. Thank you.